Before we get too far into our camera settings, we need to determine if we are going to record the RAW file format or the JPEG file format. And this is actually a very significant decision, as it's going to affect how you set up your camera before the photo, what you do with your settings during the photo, and how you treat those files after the photo. Now, some of you may be thinking to yourself, RAW, JPEG, I've never heard of these terms before, while others of you may have found some fairly dark places on the internet chasing that rabbit down the hole. Now, the RAW file format and the JPEG file format, these are two file formats that can be written to your memory card after you take the photo. In short, for the JPEG file, when you press the shutter button, the light is going to go through the lens, hit the sensor, go through the processor for some processing, like it's going to add some contrast, color, sharpness, and then be recorded to your memory card as a JPEG file. For the RAW file format, when you press the shutter button, that light's going to go through the lens, hit the sensor, and when it goes through the processor to be saved to the memory card, it's not going to make any changes at all to that photo. It's just going to be a raw record of the light that hits the sensor. Now, the easiest analogy to explain this is to look at what happens in analog film cameras. When you take a picture on a film camera, that light goes through the lens and is recorded onto the film as a negative. It's the exact light that enters the lens and is recorded to the film. You take that film negative, you send it to a lab or take it into a dark room, do some magic to it, blow it up, some other processing, and you are left with a final print. In digital terms, the RAW file is like that film negative, while the JPEG is the print. Now, there are plenty of advantages and disadvantages to both of these file formats, which is why it's such a controversial topic. So we'll start with the RAW file. One of the main advantages is that it is a raw record of the light that is recorded by the sensor. No data is thrown away, nothing is lost. It is exactly what the camera saw. You can process those photos over and over and over again, just like you can with a film negative. You can take that film negative and make all sorts of prints in different styles and looks without changing what that film negative is. And the same thing happens to the RAW file. You can change it as many times as you'd like with all the different styles you want, and it will not change that file. Now, you can actually get some really cool, precise control over how that file is processed by using the RAW file format. Now, some of the disadvantages of RAW files is because none of that data is thrown away. Everything that it captures is recorded to the memory card. Those files are much bigger. You can't fit as many RAW files on a memory card as you could if you're just recording the JPEG file format. And secondly, those files require processing. Just like you wouldn't frame a film negative and proudly hang it on your wall, you would also not take a RAW file straight from your camera and show the world. You're going to have to take it through a processing program, a RAW converter, before showing it to other friends, because they're going to be very dull, lacking color and contrast, and so you're going to have to process it. And this can be a large, huge waste of time if you go into it without having a final goal on what that photo should look like, or if you just start playing around. Now onto the JPEGs. One of the advantages of the JPEGs is that they are a much smaller file size. You can cram a lot more JPEG photos onto a memory card than you could with the RAW file format. And another advantage, which is actually a big deal to a lot of people, is that they do not require processing. Between the time you press the shutter button and that file is recorded to the memory card, it's already been to the photo lab. It's already had contrast, color, sharpening, and other adjustments made to it, and then recorded for a more visually appealing file. Or in film terms, it's already the print, the film print on that memory card. Now, the related disadvantage to that is that once you make that print, once that print or that JPEG file is recorded to the memory card, you can't really do much else to it. You can make some small, minor changes, but if you made any mistakes in that photo, you're not going to be able to change those or save them later on. And every time that you do make small changes to a JPEG file, you save it, you resave it. Every time that happens, data is thrown away and lost forever. It's a lot like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. If you've ever done that before, you know that by the sixth photocopy, you're not going to be able to read anything on that piece of paper. So here's an example of a JPEG file that I have processed and saved and saved and saved, I think 6 times, and you can see that by the 6th time, there's a lot less detail in the photo. The colors have changed, the contrast has changed. A lot of data has been lost by doing that. So this brings us to the main question: should you record the RAW file format or the JPEG file format? Now, there's a lot of well-intentioned photographers on the internet who offer a lot of bad advice. So they'll say that if you want to be a respected professional photographer, you have to shoot in the RAW file format and learn processing. Only amateurs use JPEGs. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's a bunch of baloney, all right? I know a lot of respected professional photographers who never record the RAW file format. They make the correct compositional and technical decisions right before pressing the shutter, and their JPEGs are beautiful, and that's how they earn a living. And they're professional, respected photographers. So you don't need to record the RAW file format. It's all just best on what's for you. And for these people, what's best for them is to not have to touch a RAW processor, because they're documentary photographers, event photographers. They need to get those photos out now. They don't have time to waste in a RAW processor. And so that's why it's best for them. So if that would be best for you, if you just want to press the shutter button and be done with it, all right? You don't want to have to worry about learning a processing program, wasting time processing, then record the JPEG file format. You're just going to have to make sure that you get the photo correct at capture, because you can't really do much with it later on. Now, if you do want more precise control over how your photos look, you don't want to leave it in the camera's hands, which is totally fine. I'm a bit of a control freak, and I have a hard time leaving it up to the camera. Record the RAW file format. You'll get the exact photo that was captured, and then you can do whatever you want with it afterwards. You'll have a giant digital shoebox full of negatives that you can come back to and reprocess later on. Now, there's also a compromise, and this is what I do, and this is what every camera will allow you to do, is to record both the RAW and the JPEG file format. So this works for me because, like I said, I'm a bit of a control freak. I do want those RAW files. It's a bit of an insurance policy for me. If I have an editor who wants it styled a little bit differently, I can go back to the RAW file and make those changes. If I want to revisit those files 5 years from now, and I've done this, I have those RAW files and I can reprocess them in a different style if my style changes. But I also have the JPEG file, and if those JPEG files look beautiful and match my image after I press the shutter button, then I don't need to worry about spending any time processing. So that's my little soapbox on the RAW and JPEG file format discussion. I hope it helped you try to figure out which file format is best for you. And in the next module, we're going to learn how to set that up in our camera.